So I think you're somewhat presenting with a disc herniation, somewhat not.
Mm-hmm.
Most people, when they have a disc herniation, have coughing, tingling. You had the tingling, but
Yeah.
coughing and sneezing. That bearing down or lifting heavy weight. They like, or that straining, like to lift up a suitcase. They tend to have it. Getting in and out of cars usually sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Like especially that twisting motion, getting out. Like,
Yeah.
like that really sucks.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're probably having a bulge, not a herniation.
Okay.
There's a difference.
Yeah, I was gonna ask.
Okay. Now that you asked, so here's this model. I'm gonna show you on this too. Let's pull up the nerves, but I'm gonna show you pretty much the inside. Actually, let's get rid of the nerves real quick. Let's pull up the spine. So basically, inside of the disc or inside of the spine, there's this disc.
Mm-hmm.
Right there. Okay? And that disc can migrate backwards, right? When you take the rings of the onion and you have the water, let's just say to see inside that ring, if it starts to break outside that ring, you have a herniation.
Okay.
If it breaks outside a couple of those rings but doesn't actually go out and start dripping out that way, that's like a bulge. So here's an example on this model is like this would be like bulging.
Gotcha.
Right? But like see that like that material in there, if I popped it, it can
Right.
it can kind of like leak a little bit. So pretty much like the water balloon has broken, right?
Yeah.
And now there's inflammatory. So the interesting information on that is that a disc herniation typically has better, believe it or not, better capabilities of completely healing than a bulge.
Interesting. Why is that?
Inflammation. 100%
okay.
inflammation. So when we have water, let's just say I step
Yeah.
on the jelly donut and the jelly gets on the pavement and you're like, oh, who's going to clean this up? Guess who's going to clean it up? Ants.
Right.
That's the inflammatory cells that come in and take it away, and then you come back 2 days later and like, hey, what the hell? I thought I left jelly here, and you're like, no, you didn't. Ants ate it up. Whereas if we had like a bulge here, you might actually see that same jelly donut there, but like a little bulge in that jelly donut, but the ants don't know that it's actually there because there's no jelly inside, right?
Okay.
Because there's no jelly outside of that donut yet.
Okay.
Right? So that's kind of like the kind of analogy there.
Yeah.
So the problem is that like everybody thinks that a bulge is bad and a disc herniation is not. It doesn't really matter as long as we get you better.
Yeah.
I hate to say that. But herniations cause a severe amount more pain. A bulge doesn't cause as much pain, but can be enough irritated enough that causes numbness, still tingling down the leg. I think you have a bulge.
Yeah.
Don't think if you do have a herniation, it's very mild. But basically, what's happening is that you're getting enough nicking of the nerve.
Right.
I could tell you it's pissed off enough because I didn't even have to straighten your leg even that much, or like that, or like, or even laying on your back going all the way up. I was only at about a 45-degree angle.
Right.
Once you get to about 25 degrees, you start stretching the dura mater, which is a fancy word of saying the spinal cord. Because what we're doing is when we stretch our hamstring, we're lifting this up or pulling down.
Yeah.
And this is where the nerves come into really important. Once you hit, let's just say we hit this nerve right here. Sorry, that nerve.
No worries.
Right there.
Yeah.
And that becomes part of the sciatic nerve. Once you start pulling down on that nerve, it only takes about the angle about 25 to 40 degrees to start actually pulling this down when we lift up. So you're at about 45. So I don't think it's that much of a herniation because of partially that.
Okay.
But you are having enough irritation. So I think you're having just enough irritation to the nerve that it's causing symptoms down the leg.
Makes sense.
Yes. So that's kind of that issue. With that, typically when we see this type of issue, what we're doing is we're doing a lot of extensions. That we did 20 of them outside. We do enough extensions that it literally helps reabsorb that.
Oh, okay.
I don't care if it's a herniation or a bulge
Yeah.
or somewhat in between. Like this just helps it.
Yeah, makes sense.
This is, just so you know, this is not a strengthening exercise, as you could tell, other than your triceps.
Yeah.
This is a pain relief exercise.
Okay.
first step, figure out what the heck it is.
Mm-hmm.
Second step, try to provide first aid, stop the bleeding, so to speak, and at the same time, stop pissing it off.
Right.
That's your 3 objectives.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, you already achieved objective 1, which is figuring out what it is.
Right.
All you have to do is figure out what to do to make it feel better, which is what I helped you do.
Yeah.
And then all you have to do is do it. And then 3, stop pissing it off.
Yeah.
So what's going to piss this thing off? Bending forward, touching your toes, because what you're doing is pulling on that herniation going upwards, and then at the same time you're pulling down. So you know what that looks like? Hamstring stretch.
Yeah.
You're absolutely. If there's one thing you have to avoid this week, it's hamstring stretches.
Okay.
If somebody says, I'm going to pay you to do hamstring stretches, you're going to say, hey, I'm going to pay you to tell me to walk away.
Yeah.
Like that's what you're going to do. Because, you know, and like I didn't even have to go very far. Like I only tested 1 or 2 of like the ranges. I really tested the tibial division, which guess where it goes?
Foot.
Bottom of the foot. That's usually the lowest level, the S1 level. Guess where you were most tender in the spine? Lowest level. That's why I was doing 1, 2, and 3. I was going L4, L5, S1. Is it to the left of the spine? Is it to the right? I think it's slightly on the left. Also, like this is why I was leaning you over this direction, because you were kind of corkscrewing on the spine, and you're kind of like driving that like this.
Okay.
This is why you really didn't like everything to the left.
Right.
Because you're closing down the space.
Yeah, that makes
The
sense.
space is already pissed off and closed down.
Yeah.
And now you're kind of doing that to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
that makes sense.
What I like to do with you is I like to relieve a lot of that soft tissue pain and take pressure off of it. This will just complement the treatment, not conflict. We should not have any pain. You should feel better. And at the same time, you're going to be doing your exercise. I'll tell you how much, how often, when, etc., what to look for.
Okay.
That's what I want to do.
Sounds
There's
good.
one important concept I want you to understand on day 1. We talked about it already. Centralization, peripheralization. Fancy words. Remember when I said you have numbness and tingling, or you told me that you had numbness that goes all the way down? We want it to go back to its source.
Right.
Okay? As you take more pressure off of this thing and the inflammation goes down, you're going to have this pain retreat north. Typically, there's like bus stops, I guess you could say. The heel is one of them. So you might go from like the toe, the foot, to the heel. After the heel is usually the calf. After the calf, sometimes there's behind the hamstring, usually at that split right there. Typically, it will be like around this area. It doesn't usually, this bus stop is pretty quick.
Yeah.
But this one lasts the longest.
Right.
And then people will also feel like right where I was kind of poking through onto that, well, for you it's the left side. But you will, at some point in time, when this gets much better, which you will be, most people will say, at some point in time, they're like, my back is killing me. I'm like, well, how's your leg? And you're like, I don't feel my leg pain. My back is killing me. You're like, should I get an MRI? You already asked that question, but you might say it again.
Right.
You're going to be like, well, like, are you feeling better or worse? You're like, well, my back's been killing me. You're not listening to me. And I'm going to say, well, how's the leg pain? And I'm going to say, good. Because that means the pain is out of the leg. That means the majority of the pressure is off. And now the pain is centralized up here. Remember what I said about those disc herniations or bulges and that onion? This is a fancy thing right here. So this onion, the inside of that onion, the 2/3 of it, has no nerves. NN. That's me, no nerves, right? So on the outside 1/3, it has nerves.
Okay.
So 1/3 has nerves, right?
Okay.
So that means you don't feel any pain until you start getting towards the end, which means if you're starting to reabsorb it, you're starting to slowly reabsorb some of these fibers on the outside.
Right.
I don't like those massive contractions to them. I don't like those high velocity, low amplitude adjustments to them.
Yeah.
I think you need to start working in this linear fashion, getting to reabsorb that disc. As it reabsorbs very quickly, by the way, it doesn't take as long as people think. You start then you could start tolerating adjustments. Then you start adding exercises that stabilize the spine, and now you don't have this segment that's all
Right.
pissed off and irritated. And if it is pissed off and irritated from, let's just say, a deadlift or something like that,
Mhm.
that you know exactly what first aid exercise to go back to, and then you work through it. It's just like
Right.
running or lifting. Like just
Mhm.
because you had a bad lifting day doesn't mean you give up on lifting.
Yeah.
You know.
That makes sense.
So
Well, that's good to hear. It'll be quicker than I think.
you should, and
Yeah.
like these are things that I would look for, and I'm
Yeah.
going to look for. And if you're
Mhm.
like, do this, and you progress, and then you stop progressing, I'll send you out or tell you what to do.
Right.
But I can say with a high degree of confidence, one, from doing this, but two, from
Mhm.
actually testing you. Hopefully, you get that. Like,
Yeah.
and retesting you, and like testing you on an exercise that I think is going to relieve it.
Mhm.
Then tell you, hey, redo what hurt you, and you're like, wow, that actually felt better. Then you
Yeah.
could actually say, oh my gosh, with a higher degree of certainty that this is actually going to work for you.
Yeah, definitely.
And then we'll reintroduce certain things.
Okay.
Why you have pretty good posture, so I don't think it's
Thanks.
so I don't think it's like